right. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Mental Health Mondays. I am, of course, Mind Runner, also known as AA Ron from time to time. And I'm very excited because this is a new friend of mine that I actually met, a fellow vagabond who was also politically homeless that I met on the Federacy Locals Only. And he and I have been chatting and decided to bring him on the show. And we're going to chat some more about mental health. And I'm very excited to introduce Anthony, but also you might know him as Reconsiderate from Reconsiderate.com and all the awesome jams that he blesses us with. So, Anthony, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Would you rather I call you Mind Runner or Aaron?
You know what? You're using Anthony. I'm going to switch to AA Ron instead because just we'll go with our non-stage names. We can do our stage names another time. So I'm going to go back to AA Ron because, and it's Aaron, but ever since the Key and Peele skit, I've been using AA Ron and nobody misspells my name. I go to Starbucks and say AA Ron, it gets a laugh. They don't put ERIN, they don't put ARRON. So AA Ron it is.
AA Ron, got it.
Excellent. Well, Anthony, aka Reconsider, thanks for coming on. And what kind of drew you to the fantasy community? Like, I obviously I take it that you're politically homeless as well.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, what originally drew me was just, I mean, the podcast that Bridget does. She's hilarious, and I appreciate, as you say, the politically homeless element where she's generally operating outside of mainstream cultural assumptions. Everybody is the mono think. She's very much just like, hey, wait, what are you talking about? No, let's be real here for a second. And I very much appreciate that. So I just watched her podcast for a few years, and eventually, I think it was actually, what is this, June? I think it was this January that I officially joined the locals community.
Yeah, well, it's funny. That's funny too, because I joined a while back, but I've only recently been participating. It's one of those things where how like life and things start juggling, but I feel like more and more people, like friends of mine, are pulling away from the main social media sites like Twitter, Facebook, because you get such hostility. There's such a toxicity, especially on Twitter. It's almost like on Twitter, there's a lot of attention by negativity. I'm gonna dunk on it. I always laugh. I always think it's funny. And no one's ever said, hey, I said something on Twitter, but somebody dunked on me, so now I'm gonna change my mind. Nobody says that. It's it's such a silly thing. But yeah, I feel like fantasy, to me, the fantasy community is kind of like the blind melon girl when she finally finds the other bees, at the end of the video. It's like, these are my people. And it's like, I've been trying to be this person everywhere else, and everybody's like, oh, what are you doing? But yeah, do you kind of feel like that too a little bit?
Well, I haven't really found a lot of participating in the forum. Yeah, but I'm still there, and I once in a while will chime in and respond to someone's post or something. I'm mostly in there as a support gesture for the Fantasy podcast. Yeah, because it's dope and should be supported. So, amen. That's mostly it for me.
Shout out to Sammy Flaps and Folds and the whole crew there, and Jaren and everybody. I find her. What do you feel about her perspective? Is it refreshing compared to what a lot of the other stuff that's out there?
Bridget, you're talking about?
Yes. And Sammy Flaps and Folds, I guess, too. But
certainly, it's refreshing. It's like, I don't even know how I probably originally saw her on Joe Rogan or something. I forget how I discovered her. But when I did, I was like, oh my God, finally somebody's, not putting forth all the BS, all the posturing and signaling and all that. She's just like, why are you people acting like this? Let's be real, can we? And I was just like, bingo, let me have more of this, please.
Do you sympathize sometimes with her, like her Breaking Bridget segments, to those are things that just drive you nuts too? Or,
well, I mean, not all of them, but certainly, certainly I'm like, she does one of those, and I fall over laughing, or finally someone else said this, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And it's cool because you don't have to agree with everything that, a person like Bridget says, with that platform, but having that platform, I think, is important and funny too. I think that's important too, because you could kind of take those stances, but if you got to have the entertainment value, and there's comedy in the absurdity of our society in itself. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's total absurd. We are peak absurd at this point.
The we're in the red, I think, as far as absurdity. Well, and I'm really excited about getting into your music as well. And by the way, www.reconsiderate.com. I'll put the graphics down below. And so, is that kind of where you got started? Was that always your passion, getting into music, or was this something that, like, you tried something else and then all of a sudden you got pulled into your true calling?
So if we just focus specifically on music, that was always a thing where ever since I was really, really short, I was probably like, I don't know, 6 or something.
Yeah.
That music, like just on the radio, just ordinary listen to some song, was very resonant with me. And fortunately, I had some very, let's say, encouraging parents, and
that's cool.
They encouraged me to experiment with music and play with it. So I went and participated in the school band in the percussion section. Not to toot my own horn, but I was like immediately recognized as highly talented, and the band leader would give me a lot of guidance in all this. Eventually, I stopped doing. Oh, go ahead.
The next Neil Peart.
I just didn't hear what you said. I'm sorry.
No, I just said they saw you as the next Neil Peart.
Neil Peart?
Yeah, from Rush.
That's a drummer? I don't know that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a Rush. I'm showing my age. That was a Rush reference.
Oh, apologies. Rush.
Yeah. Apologies about that. I'm showing my age already. Yeah, that he's one of them drummer guys like Neil Peart there.
I like Rush because they're really proggy, and that's one of my. I'm very drawn to that.
Yeah.
But anyway, just to quickly cross the T and dot the I on the music conversation. Eventually, I stopped doing school band stuff, and I just experimented with writing poetry in my notebook and making music on my computer and all this. Nowadays, I'm primarily live looping and beatbox. I do improvised, unscripted, unprepared live looping with only vocals. I don't have like a synthesizer or anything. It's purely vocals. Cool. And I also do rap, although I have, I did rap for, I don't know, probably like 15 years or something. And I've more or less let that fade. So that's where I am now. Got a couple shows coming up and all that.
Oh, very cool. Well, and we'll definitely want to talk about those shows. It's a couple of things you pointed out, like you mentioned how supportive your parents are. And I think that's something that could be hit or miss. I've found with folks especially very artistic driven folks. Were they, because there's a line where some parents can almost become like stage moms and stage dads, where they're almost trying to live vicariously through you, like their dreams that they wanted to, but versus some parents, like my dad, was very opposite. He didn't really get to pursue his artistic dreams. So anytime I did something artistic, he would shoot it down. Of course, that could partly be him he's mostly Scottish. And so he gets that, who do you think you are? I don't know, you lad, what do you think you're doing? You're not going to be a star. That kind of stuff. But how important to you was it to have that support network?
Well, specifically with respect to music, my parents never imposed any kind of, frankly, any expectations whatsoever. They were just like, oh, you like that? Go ahead. And that was kind of the end of it. And I mostly just managed it on my own. But outside of specifically the domain of exploring in my private art studio, outside of that, I actually have not had very much support in my life in general. And that's part of what I imagine we'll go into when we get into mental health and even autism.
And I definitely want to talk about that too. And it's sometimes, that's the stuff that really kind of, when you look back at your life, you see those, I don't want to say missed opportunities, but those moments where, hey, things could have gone a little different, but you are who you are today also because of the events that happened. Well, let's dive into that, because this is the mental health. This isn't the rock and roll, rap and R&B MTV podcast. This is the mental health podcast. You mentioned outside of music, you really didn't get much support. Explore that a little bit. What do you mean by that?
Well, we could just break straight into the autism thing.
Let's do it.
So I am autistic, and I was only diagnosed as autistic about 2 years ago. So this is a so-called adult diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very relieving experience for me, because for most of my life, people had no idea what I was talking about. I was very much on my own, off the beaten path. Hard to make friends, hard to have any kind of relationships at all. Mm-hmm. Eventually, this got into my 30s, where I said, all right, well, maybe I should see a therapist, because I was having very serious social isolation problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I go to the therapist. I'm like, yo, what it is? How do people work? I don't get people. And they
tell me about people.
I mean, that's basically my approach.
Yeah.
And the therapists are always like, you're asking for this specific thing. Let me change the subject and talk about something else that you're not asking about. Maybe you have emotional problems. I'm like, no. I'm saying I don't know how to interact with people. I don't know how to make relationships. And they're like, well, let's ignore the thing you're asking for support. Totally ignore it.
Yeah.
And that experience of like trying to get support, but being absolutely wall to wall misunderstood and dismissed, that is a pervasive problem that I've had. And that's typical for autistic people, being totally misunderstood and being treated according to some other metric, which is not at all what you're presenting. People not listening to what you're saying, but rather listening to what they imagine you might be saying. And that's the sort of thing I mean when I say most of my life, I haven't really gotten much support at all from anyone.
And it's amazing too, because we're like only in the last, I'd say, decade or so have we really started to wrap our head around autism. And there's so much more to learn. But I always think about, like, and it's interesting, you're diagnosed at an adult age, and so many adults that it's like when we were kids, it was like, oh, you're just a daydreamer, or you're a slacker, or you're, this and that. And then as an elementary school teacher, I see these kids that I can understand. When I was a kid, I acted a similar way, but now I realize, oh, that was this, or that other kid, my friend of mine, that was just laser focused in his book, and we had to like shake him to say, hey, we got to go to lunch. That was somebody that was dealing with major ADHD. And I always thought ADHD was, I can't sit still. But a lot of times, and just since doing this podcast, I've learned that ADHD a lot of times manifests itself as laser focus. Like it's almost the opposite. So that's interesting too. Like also going into the thing where it feeds into almost a bit of mistrust in the medical industry in general. I mean, we could go on and on about that, but how it seems like sometimes if they make up their mind already before you really explain, like what your issues are, you're trying to explain, hey, I think I've got this is what's going on. They're already diagnosing you with something that maybe it's financially motivating for them to steer you one way, or maybe it's just an ego thing. But how is your trust with the medical industry at this point? I hate to say the word industry, but like those kind of things. And how did you finally get to that point where you were able to say, hey, this is me?
Another thing that's typical about autism is having these like mysterious, inexplicable conditions that are chronic. Like I have some chronic pains. I have chronic sinus problems. Actually, I just emailed you yesterday and I said like, hey man, I think I might be getting sick with one of my chronic things. Turns out, no, I was totally fine today. But I do have those ongoing, like mysterious, difficult problems. And without any exception, anytime I go to a physician and I'm like, yo, I have these chronic sinus problems, for example, that, flare up and they just totally destroy my day for 2 or 3 days straight. And I don't know where they're coming from. I've done all sorts of experimenting. Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? What if I isolate that variable? And I can't figure it out. So I go to a doctor. I'm like, yo, this is your professed expertise, is it not? And they say, yeah, I'll help. And then they look for 5 seconds and they say, I don't know. And they give up and they kick me out of their office.
Ugh.
And that's just one particular issue. I have other issues as well like that. And generally speaking, I don't know if it's like too much work and not enough time kind of thing. So the physician like literally just doesn't have the available time in his or her day to really focus and dig into the nuance of my situation. and they're just like, I don't know, it's not in my diagnostic book. Bye.
Yeah, it's not in the paragraph here. Yeah.
It's easy to have compassionate understanding for them, while at the same time, I'm still not getting helped.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly going beyond physical physicians, like a bodily physician, going into the realm of psychotherapists, that's like, I have -% trust in them. They are not, when it comes to autism in particular, they are the opposite of competent. Like they do damage, and it's not okay. So that's part of why I mentioned to you that I tend to take almost an activist style approach to these topics of mental health and autism, because there's a serious problem where people really don't understand it. And frankly, it's not a mystery. It's not that hard to understand, as long as you just don't, do the same thing everyone else has always done.
Why do you think that too? Do you think there's some truths that a lot of people don't want to admit, or are a lot of us clinging to what we grew up with, or our not schism, but our perspective of what we think is the world, and it's scary to start to really get what do you think causes that lack of wanting to really explore autism, you think?
Autism specifically, I would say,
or in general, yeah.
It's, well, part of what autism is. If you read into any autistic literature, you'll hear terms like neurotype, where people talk about how the way that your brain is wired has a determining impact upon how you interpret things.
Yeah.
And so in terms of like why specifically autism, why there's such a dearth of understanding, I suspect, I'm guessing here, that it's partly because we don't have any kind of, or we're only at the very beginning of creating a framework for interpreting it. So we've inherited all of these like clumsy lenses, all of these clumsy contextualization frameworks for interpreting unexpected behavior. That's in some sense the summary of what autism is. It's unexpected social behavior. Oh, it's unexpected, rewind 200 years. You're a witch. You're the reason my crops got burned.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I mean, that you could argue that a lot of the witch trials were the lack of understanding of neurodivergence, in general. It's, the girl's barking like a dog. Well, maybe that's not possession, or a frog in her head or something, whatever they decided. And that's interesting. You mentioned something too about, like, we're just now kind of learning that it's behavior that's not normal, quote unquote normal. And so they're just like, it's like, instead of really kind of like what is normal, defining what normal is could be a kind of a problem. Autism, my understanding, autism can be a spectrum, right? It's not just like you have autism, you're this person, right? And do you think that, like, sometimes people want to put like autism as this one diagnosable box, and it's like this?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you often, if you again look into modern autistic dialogue, you'll hear people say things like, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, as opposed to you met them all, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you're right that the whole idea of an autistic spectrum, it's not even clear that there's only one thing called autism. There might be different, flavors and variations that, again, we don't have the framework for interpreting it.
Yeah.
But when people talk about a spectrum, usually there are one of two things they might mean. One thing they might mean is the so-called intensity or severity levels, where people talk about like, oh, you might be a high functioning autistic person versus like very serious day-to-day high needs for support.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. Like in my experience, that does exist. I speak with a number of other autistic people. Like, that absolutely is true. There is an intensity element to it. But usually when people talk about the autistic spectrum, what they're really talking about is there are all these different qualities, and any given autistic person may or may not have any of those qualities to any given magnitude. For example, a very common autistic quality is difficulty making eye contact or sustained eye contact.
Yeah.
And you might have one autistic person who is like, cannot look you in the eye for 1 second at all, ever, under any circumstances. And you might have another person who is kind of okay, maybe briefly glances away a little bit, but is more or less okay in terms of eye contact. So you might look at that and be like, oh, well, only the one who's very exaggerated, like, Rain Man in the movie, that's real autism. But this other one, no, you're just being a jerk. It's like, whoa, no. So
it's like a sliding scale. It could be a sliding scale. It's not necessarily, Rain Man is the example, which that's interesting you brought that up, because the first time I ever really heard of autism was from that movie. And so I immediately just said, put it in a box and said, okay, if you're Rain Man, that's autism. And then when later on, when people would describe somebody, oh, this person has autism, and they're nothing like that. Right. And they're they're just like, to me, a quirky person. And quirky by my definition is just someone a little bit different than me. And all of a sudden I'm like, well, wait a second. They're not Rain Man. How are they autistic? And I feel like sometimes, do you see this a lot, where the term autism, sometimes people feel it's used a lot very loosely, and like just to describe anybody that's different. And do you think sometimes there might be some either parents or people that try to say they're autistic just to kind of describe being quirky? And does that muddy the waters a little bit and make people like not quite understand the difference between someone that's like a high functioning and autistic versus someone that's just making an excuse for their weird behavior? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you mean. In the circles I run in, I don't often hear people saying that sort of thing, but I am familiar with the idea that someone be like, "Oh, I'm a little autistic."
Yeah.
Like, whoa. No. It's not a matter of degree. You either are or not. And the essential essence, like the way that you can spot an autistic person is, how do I phrase this? It's not changing their social approach based on the situation they're in. So always acting the same with everybody and not being able to build relationships, not understanding why that person didn't respond well to that thing I said. That's the core essential element of what comprises what we call autism.
I get it. It's totally, I have a case in my head where, and this was just recently, I had a 4th grade girl who, her mom knew she was autistic. She actually had been diagnosed already, but her mom never told her. And like, she was like in tears, like crying because she couldn't make friends. She would try really hard, and bless her heart, she would try, but she was like a bull in a china shop when it came to like trying to make friends, and she just could not, for the life of anything, read social cues. Right. It was like a blind person trying to read something was with her. It was literally like, that was like, whatever that is that reads social cues was absent from her. Yes. And then when her mom sat her down, I remember we had a parent teacher conference, her mom was in tears, we're talking, she finally broke down, sat her down, and had to actually explain to her what autism was and that she was autistic, explain exactly. And you would have thought like not only a light bulb, but like this incredible weight just lifted. And she was a total, not want to say totally different, but such a happier kid from the rest of that year. And even now, like, she's just like so like and I love this, that she's just diving into life now. But it's almost like that's it. That's that explanation. And now she realized, like, I think a lot of folks that don't realize those things, and tell me if you've ever seen this or felt this way yourself, they keep thinking, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Instead of realizing it's not really what's wrong with me. This is how I'm different.
Does that make sense? That's very common among adult, late life adult diagnosis of autism. That's very, very common. That they'll say like, oh, I've been trying my whole life. I bend over backwards for everybody, and they still hate me. And I don't know why they hate me. That I had the same experience you just described, where after going to a number of therapists and having them be the most clumsy, incompetent fools, and constantly redirecting to not what I'm talking about, I had the good fortune of being introduced to an autism counselor, somebody who specializes in autism. And he was the one where I worked with him for a little bit, and he was just like, I have no doubt about you at all. You are definitely autistic. And now when I talk to him, I say something and he immediately understands what I'm saying. And we go the whole session with him answering the questions I'm asking, But working with him had the same light bulb going on moment for me. I spent my whole life, again, bending over backwards for everybody. I'm doing every single thing you're asking me, and you're still treating me like garbage. But now that I have the autism framework to understand, it's just like, oh,
that's it. Yeah.
Everything fits now.
That's got to be like, that's got to really affect a kid growing up too, to not understand why things are not working. They should, like, your heart's in the right place. You're trying, but you're like a bull in a china shop when it comes to like social situations. I've worked for people with autism before, and I had a boss that everyone hated because she just could not read the room. Yeah. Like, she would, like, one example is we were saying goodbye to a retiring teacher, and she was retiring in the middle of the year at Christmas. And we're all in this emotional moment, this goodbye after school. It was her last day. Everybody's in tears because she's been teaching for 30 plus years, and we're all saying goodbye. And then she shows up with this little box and goes, well, I figure since it's her last day, she can share my gift to you all. And she opens the box. It says, no extra professional development for next week, or something. Like, it was some like silly little like thing, like you don't have to go to training next week. And I watched that, and everybody was just like, oh, what a terrible person. And I thought about that for about a week, and I realized she's autistic, because like started clicking in my mind, because that's something my autistic students would do, not reading the room. And in her mind, she thinks this is helping. She thinks this is this is her contribution to this emotional moment. She doesn't get the situation. And what happens is, not knowing her diagnosis, or not knowing that she's autistic, she just comes across as an asshole. And so many of my colleagues, even to this day, some of my colleagues just can't stand her. And I mean, I'm not going to excuse her behavior because of autism, but I think it's more of a sad situation. We can go on about education on the Educators podcast. I think she's a symptom of the problem in education. You don't put an autistic leader you don't put an autistic adult in a leadership position like that, where your job requires you to read the room. You put her in a position where she can really play to her strengths. She's tremendous with attention to detail. I mean, I don't know if you like, I'm not saying people with autism can't be leaders, but in her specific case, not being able to read the room is almost a job requirement of being a principal at a school. I don't know if you see that.
Yeah. So with respect to read the room, there's a little more nuance to it than that.
Okay.
And I can confirm for you that I'm in leadership positions. In my profession. So, for example, I've given a presentation to 10,000 people before. I am a public speaker. I'm actually my company's leader in public speaking. I own our whole program on like, here's how you speak. Here's how you train people in an education setting. I coach people one-on-one. I work very closely with people on building their shortcomings when it comes to public speaking and all this. Mm-hmm. So it's less about reading the room, so to speak, and it's more about knowing what other people are expecting on a subconscious level.
That makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. And I want to take back, I wasn't trying to say that people with autism can't be leaders. This particular person, with her situation and the way she baked in the oven, by the time, this was not the position for her. But if you plugged her into like a data and analysis curriculum development position, sky's the limit. But you're right. And I guess it's right. Not necessarily read the room, but like, if you can understand what others are expecting, that can help you be a good and effective leader, is kind of what you're saying. So I do hope, I take back if it was implied that they can't be a leader. I didn't mean it that way, but that particular autistic individual needs to get out of leadership. If that makes sense. That's kind of where I was going with that.
That was a very smooth recovery. You win on that
one. Woo! That's why I got the beach vibe going today. I'm going with the beach vibe. So I'm trying to smooth on and hey, what's going on? No, but it's fascinating too. And I, I'll say this right now. There's so much I don't know, but things I've observed with my students at school and even coworkers, I've even seen some, like, I don't think I'm autistic, but I see things that where I struggled growing up with certain things, certain social interactions. I'm like, oh, well, this because of this, that's probably why that happened, right? Why I felt this way. Not to the degree like my recent student that just found out she's autistic, but it's almost like when you grew up, like what the time that I grew up in, and I'm showing my age, they like you really didn't talk about mental health. You had like the kids that were neurodivergent were all in one classroom together, and they didn't really interact much with the other kids. Occasionally they would go to like PE or certain other things, but it was a lot easier just to call them like stupid or crazy or a window licker, those kind of things. And then to come to find out that it's like it's almost like just it's kind of like when you're like learning differently or growing up differently. Yeah, like I always try to compare the analogy, and right or wrong, that kids are like raw dough that you put in the oven. Now, everybody could bake at the same temperature, but not every muffin is going to come out the same. And some have different dough has different consistencies. And so not to go, everybody's a snowflake, but everybody comes out a little different. But also, I think there's this desire and even in education to try to shoehorn everybody into this same path when there's everybody's so different.
Yeah.
Do you see that? And when you reflect on your childhood, do you kind of see where maybe you like kids were kind of like forced to kind of go one path when there were so many paths that they could go?
Well, I personally, like with respect to schooling, I always had a very good, easy time with school. I was always got 100% A+ in every single one of my classes all the way through college kind of person.
Nice.
So I like my autism doesn't manifest in any kind of intellectual component, intellectual disability or anything. I actually have the opposite. Like I'm swinging the other way, and I tend to have more in intellect and cognitive processes.
Yeah.
But with respect to your comment about like are kids shoehorned into the same path, I suspect, as someone with experience as an educator, almost 20, not quite 23, almost 23 years as an educator, and also experience as a professional, almost 20 years working in the business sector. I suspect that largely the explanation for that shoehorning is logistical. Somebody's like, all right, I just got to do something. All right, we all got to, get on the bus. Let's get in line. It's not so much about like, we have to make sure we hold back this one who's
twisting
different.
Of a mustache or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's more like the teacher is stressed out and just trying to get through the lesson so that everybody can do, and they're just trying to do what they can. And they have this problem of throughput where they have, 20, 30 kids in a class. How am I going to give all 20 or 30 of them attention? Yeah. I already have to go home and spend my whole night grading papers. Where do I find the time for any of this? So I suspect that the push toward, let's say like uniform behavior is likely largely influenced by just logistical needs to get through the day, more so than like, I'm going to neglect my responsibility to be sensitive to individual needs. There's just not enough bandwidth.
Yeah, and you could almost argue that part of the problem is probably class sizes. When you've got 20 to 30 kids in one classroom. I mean, as a teacher, I'm trying to be attentive to everybody all at once. Yeah, teachers have to be a doctor, a mom, a dad, a teacher. They have to be a game show host. They have to be, and we're competing against TikTok and YouTube and all these other interests. And we have to do all these things and make sure that everybody's okay. Make sure Sally got enough to eat for breakfast. Make sure Billy didn't get abused by his father that previous night. And make sure all this stuff happens. And then we have to make Jamestown interesting. Like we have to go like, hey, this, and the two kids in the class that are excited about Jamestown, you've already got them, but the other 18 to 22 kids, you've got to somehow get them hooked in it too. tell me a little bit about your experience in education. Were you in the classroom a lot, or?
So I'll give you the brief version of my journey as an educator.
Okay.
When I was in school, an undergraduate, I was majoring in math and minor in psychology as well, but
nice.
Majored in math. And so for the last 2 years, I think when I was a junior in undergrad, I started doing tutoring in the university math center. And it worked really well. I was able to help most of the people who came through. Mm-hmm. And so after college, after I graduated, I continued doing that. So I worked for a standardized test prep company doing SAT, GRE, that kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
And that was largely like when I was working with SAT or PSAT, when I was doing that stuff, that was with high school kids. And so that would include one-on-one tutoring, but also a classroom with them. So I would usually the classes were like, I don't even remember, 3 or 4 hours, or maybe not that long, 2 or 3 hours, let's say. And working with those high school students for about 3 years or so, I was in that job. That made me say, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't like working with and that's when I transitioned to my current role, which I've been in for, like I said, just under 20 years, where I'm an educator in the business setting. So I teach adults. I do the professional on the job training kind of stuff. And go ahead. Yeah.
Well, as you said, what sort of things do you train adults on? Is it like technology, or is it financial, or is it leadership skills? What kind of things do you impart on them?
Yeah.
And how does it parallel your education system, like a regular teacher in a school?
Well, I'll answer that last one first. Mm-hmm. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe I should say what I do first. Yeah, let's do that. I'll say what are the topics.
Okay.
So the primary thing I own and am responsible for, I'll tell you, and then there's other miscellaneous other things I also do. So the primary thing I own is system administration. So I teach system administrators, people who are like database administrators, Unix administrators. I teach them how to maintain the software that I work with. So that's like a 2-week long training where it's like all day long, 8:30 to 5 type of thing. Usually my classes are usually around like 15 to 20 people ish, plus or minus whatever. Mm-hmm. That's the main thing I'm responsible for, system administration. So I not only lead the classes, I design the content and all this. So I do the full stack of it. Then in addition to that, I also train other things like mental health awareness.
Wow.
That's mostly that's a very short training. That's like 2 hours. And that's mostly just basic ABCs like, hey, mental health is a real thing and you should prioritize it just like you prioritize your physical well-being. Here's how you might recognize if you're in a meeting and somebody perhaps is building up toward a mental health issue. Just sort of basic recognition of mental health signals and also management of them. I also, as I said a moment ago, I'm responsible for our program on training people how to train, how to present, how to do public speaking, the coaching program. I own all of that, which includes a variety of classes like, here's how you get someone's attention. Here's how you maintain their attention. Here's how you get them to trust you. Stuff like, here's how you make them inspired and want to do the class and not just space out. So I own that curriculum and I'm the author of all of that. And there are a couple of other classes here and there, little miscellaneous things that I also am responsible for. So those are the things, that's the subject. That's what I train. I also, you also asked, how is it different from like a grade school?
Yeah.
Well, one of the ways it's different is that it's, 8:30 to 5 all day straight. Yeah. That's one thing that's different. Although it's, in grade school, it's still many hours. So it's not small.
Even after the bell rings, we're still working. But yeah, I get that. It's like an 8 to 5 thing.
And training adults also is fundamentally different from children, or not even children, but like through adolescence.
Yeah.
Roughly around, I don't know, roughly age 20 or so is when people begin to make a tipping point. Mm-hmm. And the essential difference is something like, for an adult, they already have their life, they're busy. They've more or less formed their personality. They have their thoughts and opinions of things. They've had life experience that has given them a somewhat filled or complete vocabulary for how to interpret and interact with the world. They're pretty self-sufficient.
Yeah.
So for an adult, when you approach training or education, there's a lot of persuading and convincing, like, hey, this is worth your time. Please don't give up on this and go do email. You have to constantly sell them. There's a lot of selling. I have to sell you on why this benefits you. Look at how this is worth your time right now to pay attention to this. So there's a lot of selling. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of relating back to something they already know, in addition to just explaining and describing. You have to do a lot of, hey, it's like this thing you already know, because their brain is already full. That's a lot different from children, where with children, you can more or less just be like, long division. And they'll be like, okay. And you might have to work with them on like how to do it. You might have to have some kind of discipline or behavioral aspect to your teaching as well, so that they can sit there and do the long division, but you don't have to convince them as much as you do with an adult.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like you mentioned that, like, what they say around 25 is actually when the brain is fully formed.
Right.
And it's also much more difficult to teach an old dog new tricks, or more tricks, like but I love that your approach of making those connections, I think, is important. When you really want to convince somebody, you want to make that connection of, hey, this is just like why this is important, making those analogies and really trying and really, and I think sometimes the word selling gets a negative rap, because you think when so a lot of people, when you hear the word selling, you think of a used car salesman with the wacky bow tie and the wacky inflatable things, but I before I was a teacher, I was a car sales manager. But we were for a rental car company, and there was no negotiation. It was a very straight up, hey, it's a used rental car. This is the history. This is it. And we were much more customer service based, but there was always that stigma of selling. But to me, selling is convincing somebody to see the benefit in what you're offering. Yeah, if you really strip away all of the negative context, that's essentially what it is. And I think you have to, and we're always like, not to be Alec Baldwin in the Glengarry Glen Ross movie, but always be closing. But it's not as sinister as that, as if you can truly believe that what you're offering is a true benefit to the person you're talking to, but if they don't see it, you have to kind of close them on it. But you do that by really convincing them and showing them how it is a benefit, and that's sales. And I think sometimes sales gets a bad rap, but I'm really interested to bring you back on the Educators Podcast to talk about that, because everything you just described, teachers need, and it's weird, because there are teachers that have that naturally, that ability to build that rapport and trust. Like there was a year one teacher, she walked into a classroom and all the other teachers are saying, oh, you're going to have a terrible year because all these kids are terrible. And she says, well, I'll make up my own opinion. And she got in, and they were all eaten out of her hand. Their behaviors improved. They felt they wanted to come to school. There was this one poor kid that he had a broken home. He had a really terrible home life, but he would come early just because he felt safe in her room versus where else he was. And I think there's a lot of folks in the education system that could really benefit from understanding that just following the curriculum isn't enough, but there's things you can do to really build ownership, or not agency, build kind of that, having the students excited about it. And I think there's a lot of companies out there could benefit from that, because I think one of the biggest obstacles a lot of sales folks have to overcome is that stigma of, let me sell you something. Am I hitting kind of along the lines of what you teach
on the topic of selling?
Yeah, or just in general, making those connections and getting people to understand like why things are important, and building that trust.
Well, trust is a separate topic from selling. Yeah. So the selling is more or less like there's a hierarchy to how it functions psychologically. Mm-hmm. So you first have to get their attention. And with specifically adults, like what I'm about to say applies for anyone of any age.
Yeah.
But specifically in the context of adults, they have a lot of things going on. Mm-hmm. They have to, manage this project they're working on, and they have to respond to that email, and they have to get ready for this thing that's happening next week, and they also thinking about what they're going to make for dinner tonight. So they don't have infinite bandwidth like children do. Children have this like open-ended, whoa, we're doing that, okay, I have nothing else going on. Adults have a lot going on. So the first step has to be convincing them, hey, this thing is good for you. Hey, you want to do this thing? That's the selling part. It's just getting their attention that the topic is worth paying attention to. After that, that's when you start building the trust. So trust is about saying, all right, you've convinced me that this topic is worth my attention, but I still have to listen to you. So why should I trust that you can help me?
Yeah.
So there's a step 1, step 2 element to it. And what I train in my onboarding for new trainers and presenters and such is that the way to build trust is by sharing what you do. You don't tell somebody like, oh, I'm an educator, and then you end it there. You don't say what your job role is.
Yeah.
You give them a glimpse of seeing you do the thing that you're trying to sell them on. So for example, when I am let's say training a class on how to train a class, I will talk about how I get people's attention by saying something like, hey, you know what? When you get someone's attention, this is going to really improve the way that you are able to lead your classes. Now they're going to want to pay attention. You sold them on the thing that benefits them. Yeah. Good. You got their attention. I do this in my classes by, and then I give a concrete example. Or the thing I really do, what I'm known for at my company is so-called meta training. I do this meta performance where I'll like do the thing to you as I talk about the fact that I'm doing it to you. And people this like very illuminative light bulb moment where they're like, their brain kind of breaks when they see that I'm doing the thing that I'm trying to convince them of. And I kind of lost track of where I was going with that. Frankly,
well,
thanks.
There really is something. Something I really want to tell you right now is that there's a very, very cool strategy you can use to get people's attention. And it's what I just did. Like that kind of thing. And they're like, they see you actually do the and some of my greatest professors when I was taking classes for my my education degree, one of my favorite professors, she would do that. She would be doing the strategies she's teaching, and then like you'd see that like the meme moment where the guy's going like this when they realize that that's going on. Yeah. And it's I think that's really cool. The like with building trust, sometimes some people I think are afraid to show too much of their own personal life or humanity. Is it important to show in building trust to really share like your humanity, like almost like have a person like show how it personally you believe in it rather than like a straight just sell? Because I think there's some teachers that really some people, I don't say teachers, but in general people, they put a wall up. It's like, I'm not going to let you see who I am. But I feel like sometimes you got to let that crack a little bit and let them see inside behind the wall to build that trust. Do you agree?
That's step 3. So that's different from trust. Sorry. Trust. So the step 2 of trust is, you know that I am an authority and you know that I do this thing. I'm not just reading a script. I'm the real deal. I actually can help you. That's the trust part. That's step 2. But now, as you say, step 3 is where you go next. And that's where you share of yourself candidly, including, most importantly, the things you are personally passionate about, genuinely passionate about. Yeah. That part brings not trust, but rather comfortability. And more importantly than comfortability, your genuine passion and your genuine interest rubs off on them, on the people you're teaching, so that they receive an inspiration and they also like, oh, there is something to care about. Look at how my teacher is very much interested in this thing. Maybe there's something to be interested in. I'll pay more careful attention to this. So there's a very clear hierarchical way that the mind unfolds. First, attention. Second, you have to make sure this thing is legitimately trustworthy. Third, why do I care about this? And then the fourth element after that is take action. So if you leave a discussion in the realm of just intellectual discourse, it'll fade. But if you make it into an action, okay, now do this thing, practice this action That's what makes learning happen. Like the solidification of neural pathways comes through action, not through conceptual contemplation.
Yeah, I found that a lot of the most effective lessons as a teacher are those where we have the discussion, we dive into why it's important, like whether it's a science investigation, a math activity, or exploring something in history. When once we have that discussion, then a hands-on project where they're having to use what we discuss and what they learned and apply it to, maybe it's constructing a model of the Jamestown, fort, or maybe it's creating a aqueduct that the ancient Romans had, or having that. It sticks with. I remember stuff that I remember as a kid weren't the just the lectures, it was the things where I actually had like a physical thing I had to apply to do that. You mentioned also that we're talking about how important mental health, and how one of the things that you share is the mental health aspect. What are some things you feel like maybe people get wrong about mental health in general, or what are some challenges like you that we need to remember with mental health, would you say?
Wow, that would have been a good question to start with.
You're right, and you know what? Sometimes it takes me about 50 minutes to come up with a good question. So, we'll start. Let's start over. Hey, welcome to Mental Health Mondays. No, I'm just kidding, but yeah, that's kind of I wanted to kind of get there, but here we are.
Yeah. So we are here now. That's good. And as far as like what are common stumbling blocks, I think people tend to like there's a earlier in the discussion today, I talked about frameworks and contextualization. People have, from our American culture, let me try to like really break this down. From the American culture, including the dominant themes in American media, mental health is presented as though it's this giant mystery. Like, oh no, where is this coming from? We have a mental health crisis. This came out of nowhere. This is so opaque. How did we get to this point? There's nothing we can do. So people tend to come into mental health discussions with that framework, with that kind of contextualization. And again, that's where I take on the more activist role, where I'm like, we need to destroy that. That's not okay, because mental health is not a mystery. There's nothing mysterious about it. There's no part of it that's difficult. And yet people treat it like it is. And so there's this, I don't know how to, not like limping into the conversation, but they get off on the wrong foot is part of what I'm trying to say here. They get off on the wrong foot. They don't know what it is. Whereas what they should be doing is relating with it. Whether that's because they personally have some kind of issue, which PS, virtually everybody has some kind of anxiety or insecurity or a complex of some sort. So they should be relating with it, but they tend not to. They tend to just like treat it as this distant topic way over there that has nothing to do with me. And then I'm confused why I'm frustrated with my life. If only I could connect those two. It's like, yes, you should be connecting those two. Those are the two dots to connect. But they don't. So that's usually where my discussions go. It's mostly like, hey, it's not a big deal. Understand that this is pretty normal. You should be looking for I'll give you the short version of the training I give. It's essentially like, first, understand that mental health is not a mystery that comes out of nowhere. We already covered that.
Yep.
But then after that, the things you look for are these like two phases of recognizable things, behavioral things, which are having a lot of external stressing factors. So things like, I don't have time in my day. I lost my job. Budget's really tight. I was sick, last week. Things that are happening outside of you. I have too many projects at work. I can't keep up with it. Things that are happening outside of you starting to overwhelm you to the point that it's overwhelming. It's disarming. Like you can't, you don't really recover as quickly. So that's the first thing to notice, whether in yourself or in other people. Someone else, you're talking to someone and the content of their conversation is this long chain of things that are overwhelming them, resulting in the conclusion of, I don't know that I can handle this. That's the first thing to look for, which is
Yeah.
so easy as long as you're looking for it.
Yeah.
Then the second thing, after the idea of external stress factors beginning to overwhelm you, the next stage is behavioral changes, some kind of recognizable change in behavior. Now, that could be something extremely extreme, like violently acting out toward others. Like, that's highly recognizable.
Yeah.
But on the other end of the spectrum, there's also just like subtle changes. Somebody is usually pretty talkative, but for the past couple of months, she's been isolating herself and not talking to anyone. It doesn't really seem, she's not causing a problem, but that's a change. That's a change to her baseline behavior. So the two things that I train people on is how to recognize external stressors that are piling up to the point that they overwhelm you, coupled with watch for when it spills over into behavioral changes, because that's when you know you're heading toward an issue or even a crisis.
Yeah, like and not just with others, but with yourself too. Like if you notice that you're normally coming to a meeting or you're normally you're interacting with people a certain way, and then like I've had moments where I'd snap at somebody and I'd go off, and then I realize, why did I do that's not me? Like why did I like that's so out of character for me, and I'd feel terrible. And then when I'd go and apologize, I'd realize that it was like you said, it was one of those, it was the external factors just completely over time whittled away, and I got to a breaking point where I just was like, sometimes what a lot of teachers try to do, we try to be the superheroes, we try to do it all. It's almost like we got there's the joke that even if you're dead, you're still in the coffin doing your lesson plan, or you still got to send, like you're in the coffin, but your hand has that Post-it note to hand to the sub. It's that kind of thing. And it's work-life balance is so, it's like you said, it's almost a duh moment, but it's so hard, I think, for a lot of us to really understand the importance of, I don't want to say self-actualization, but to understand what you're saying, to reflect on your external factors and internal. Going on the work-life balance, I mean, is that something you see we desperately need with ourselves in society?
It certainly depends on your profession, but I would say in general, yes, there does seem to be a pattern of, let's say, like needing to put healthy boundaries around, not bringing work home. I know teachers in particular like get hit really hard with that, more than many other professions. But on the other end, there's also, I've found in my conversations, because I deal with people who are, let's say, roughly around age 25-ish up through 60s or however old. So I deal with a wide range of adults. And I've found, especially recently in the past couple of years, that the younger generation tends to have an attitude that, they don't want to, for example, slave away for a company who will throw them out next week for not curtsying properly before the queen. And they, as a result of not wanting to waste their life slaving away, they tend to swing the opposite direction, and they'll like full on just not do their work. And they'll say things like, no, I'm setting personal boundaries. That's my right. I have the right to set personal boundaries. So I'm going to make sure I have good mental health by just not coming into work. And it's like, whoa, hold on. You can put on personal boundaries, but you can't just abandon post.
Yeah, it's like I'm gonna work from home today, and like, Bob, you're a firefighter. You can't work from home today, or something along those lines.
Let's hope he doesn't have to work from home.
Yeah, well, yeah. If he has to work from home,
if he's a firefighter, let's hope he doesn't have to.
He's got bigger problems to worry about. Exactly. Yeah, that's interesting. And I you see that like where some almost like the other extreme where, and that's another, I think, misconception. I think sometimes, like going back to that vague thing, is like with autism or just mental health in general, there's some folks that almost like use that cloud of mystery, which really isn't, to almost as an excuse to go the other direction. Yeah, and I think, and I do see that where they go, oh, I'm taking a mental health day. Well, no, you're just gonna, do you really? Like I've had friends. It's funny to me, like it's almost like the people that need to take a mental health day don't,
right,
because they're taking on too much, whereas the people that are taking the mental health days, yeah, okay, oh really, ooh, you're gonna sit on the couch and watch Netflix, oh no, that kind of, I mean, not that that's wrong, because I mean, if you really do, but do you see, and it's, do you see like in general, not just that, but like with this generation coming up, what are some differences you see with this, like this generation that's kind of coming up that have been pretty much raised with a phone in their head, in their face, or an iPad in their face, and almost this, like this, I don't want to say entitlement, but like I found that there's almost like a feeling of you need to entertain me kind of thing, rather than I've got to work for a goal. Do you see that a lot, or is that something?
Yes. However, while I agree that there is the observable phenomenon that they are raised on their phones, as you say, or tablets or what have you.
Yeah.
I perceive that as more about living in a place that is very, like living in a culture, American culture, that is, I don't want to say well off, but like we don't really have problems in our world. We're not like as I look out my window here, it's just some people. It's just like someone walking down the street. It's not like we're dealing with bombs and rampant murder everywhere. It's like we don't really have huge problems. And that's why, by the way, you see a lot of people who tend to like hyper focus on like small slights, and they'll get very upset about some little small thing you did. Well, that's because they don't have huge things that you did. And that's actually rather relevant. So because we have American culture has gotten to this point where it's like you don't have to try at all to get a glass of water. You don't have to try at all to get something to eat, even if it's not the most elegant, luxurious meal. You could get a sandwich. You're not starving to death. And that aspect of living in a somewhat comfortable, cushy culture, even if you're not at the very top of the culture, like even the people at the bottom of American culture are still at the top of the world.
Yeah.
So
we are the 1%.
Where the entitlement thing comes from. But
we are the 1%. Yeah.
The American culture really is. I mean, and it's that should be humbling. That should result in a humbling, like let's say grateful attitude. But for most people, it just goes in one ear and out the other because they're focused on that one small thing you did.
Do you think humans crave conflict, or like if things are going too well, it's almost like we seek a problem?
I would say that's not a human thing. That's a brain thing. So the brain is it's a naturally the brain is like the central processing unit of your body, and the brain's job is to make sure that you stay alive.
Sure.
And to do so, it's primarily about remembering and retaining problems, noticing the things that could be threats. So it's really more the idea of like looking for a problem when there isn't one. That's more about the function of the brain, more so than just a human thing.
Yeah, it's almost it's that survival mentality. It's like, okay, nothing's gonna eat me. Do I have a roof over my head? Do I have something to eat?
And this leads into a somewhat potentially powerful comment on the topic of mental health. So we have this brain that is responsible for keeping us alive. Thank you, brain. But the issue arises when someone allows their brain to automatically make decisions and determine their behavior. It's the checking out from consciousness and allowing the automated processes of the brain. That's where things like mental health problems, social discord, anything like that, It all comes from just running on autopilot. So what is mental health? How do you get mental health? What is the solution for these problems? Well, mental health, like my definition of mental health, is when your mental model of reality matches reality. And the only way you can get there is by evolving on a conscious level, evolving your automated processes, some of which you just inherited, whether from literally biologically or inherited through the impressions you've had from your experiences. That's your brain being programmed. You need to take responsibility for programming the bugs, for fixing the problems.
Fixing the bugs, yeah.
So that involves an element of transcendence. And here's the punchline. Mental health is the journey of transcending out of identifying with your physical body and into just a disembodied perspective that's using the body.
Whoa. All right, I am this guy right now. That's interesting. That's very, and okay, couple that with the big question of why are we here? It's almost like if that is the process, it's almost like we're here to form this in a way, and like learn how to be. Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm not articulating right, but that's deep right there. Is that you're learning how to kind of the stuff that has affected you from your environment and the stuff that you were born with, and you're essentially decoding. You're like if you use the analogy of code, you're decoding the bugs, you're fixing the bugs, and achieving that. I don't want to say Zen because that's kind of a cliche, but like you're achieving an enlightened perspective, and enlightened doesn't mean that I'm going to be sitting here like a monk and
right,
like meditating in the middle of the kitchen, but like I think you can find happiness in that when you have that balance of when your reality and is matched as close as possible to reality. And I think it's liberating to get to that point. I think. Would you agree?
Yeah.
And is that kind of what you're saying? I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
I appreciate you saying that you don't want to put words in my mouth. That's another typical autism thing that people are always putting words in my mouth.
So what you're saying is,
right. Let's see, where do I want to begin with that? I would say like what you're describing, this process of like learning to overcome the external factors that influence you.
Yeah.
That I would say for sure is where most people are in their journey of, let's just say, existence, without diving into words like soul and things like that.
Yeah.
But just, here we are on Earth. Stuff's happening. We can agree that there seems to be a world and reality. And if you look at the nature of human society and our history and such, we very much along the history of humanity are at a point now where we're ready to make a shift more and more and more and more and more and more every day. More and more people are getting more and more ready to make this shift into the transcendent. But I very much like the way you said it's like the end goal is not to sit there and meditate. It's like, yes, I'm so happy you said that. The whole idea of meditation and practice and all that, that's a bridge to get somewhere. Like the end goal, I would say, the end goal is to the degree that humans are a social organism, which I mean in a very formal sense. There's only like 2 or 3 organisms that are known to be social, ants being another one. But humans are a social organism, meaning that we don't have, it's not like any 2 individuals are completely self-sufficient, like a bear. Like any 2 bears have kind of the same capabilities, but any 2 humans can have just a small sliver of what's needed to be a human. We have to function in a community in order to have everything we need. So therefore, because humans are in this social element and we're always striving to have more and more, let's say, effortlessness, like American culture has gotten pretty far. Most people can get a sandwich. We're striving toward more and more social function, more and more, this is going to work for anyone who's born anew today. The real end goal that we're working toward, whether we know it or not, is to create a world, to create a society and a world that ideally perfectly reflects the total I'll use the word beautiful function of nature and natural order, the way things actually work, not what we think we want it to be, what we want it to work like. Oh, wouldn't it be great if reality were like this? No, reality is the way it is. We're learning how to mesh with reality so that we can express and build monuments to reality.
Because we can alter our perception of reality, but we can't alter reality. It's kind of like, it's when you put the VR glasses on, you're seeing it's virtual reality, but it's not reality. I mean, you can see this you can walk the pyramids, but if you keep walking in your house with the glasses on, you're going to hit the wall. You're not going to, you're going to smack. Oh, what? And that's reality, literally smacking you in the face. That's deep, dude. I dig this, man. This is,
I dig your analogy about walking into a wall with a VR headset. That's very apt.
Kind of, because, and, there's a lot, we can get into a lot of like reasons why people alter their reality in their head. A lot of it's sometimes dealing with trauma. Sometimes there's things they don't want to do. And kind of, I think I want to say, I understand people not wanting to go on this journey, want to be safe, but I almost feel like it's a responsibility of all of us to really try to walk this path, to try to really embrace the time we have, because it's almost like that movie, was it Click with Adam Sandler, where he's got the remote, and if he fast forwards his life. I feel like a lot of us, and then all of a sudden he's an old man and is all this regret that he didn't do. I feel like a lot of us get so caught up in the automatic, automaticity, but the system, the routine, that we don't take the time to really do that self-exploration and really try to match up our reality. And I think that's deep. And I think that almost that touches on, stuff when I'd love to say that I'm sitting here smoking weed when I do this, but I'm stone sober when I think about this kind of stuff, where it's like, what is our purpose? And, with whether, your concept of God or whatever, that it's more so like, if just looking at reality, this is almost like we're in a vessel that's growing something. We're growing towards something inside our cabases. And it's like that's investing that time to find that is to me, I feel like it's rewarding in itself. Even if you never achieve some final destination, the journey is a journey of improvement. And I feel like you find happiness as you continue. Like, I feel happier now. I'm more overweight than I was when I was in my 20s, but mentally I feel so much better about myself than I did when I was 20. And it's like, and I wouldn't, like, all the mistakes that I made leading up to that, I wouldn't change, because it brought me to this, but I also can reflect on understanding. And that's really deep what you're saying. I really dig that, because it's kind of like, it's dealing with, it's aligning your reality with reality. And one of the things that frustrates me in today's society is, and so this is a human thing, and this is something I tried. One of the main reasons I got into teaching was, the scientific method, scientific investigation. You start off with a question and you develop a hypothesis, and you take that hypothesis, you test it, and then you look at the data objectively as possible, and then you create a conclusion. Now, your conclusion based on the data could be that your hypothesis was wrong. But where a lot of humans, I believe, and tell me what your thought on this, is that I think a lot of us humans, we get so emotionally invested in that hypothesis or our belief in something, that when the data comes along that shows that hypothesis is wrong or flawed in some way, we take offense to it and we ignore the conclusion, because to change your hypothesis, if you're emotionally or identify with that thought, changes you. And I feel like a lot of humans, that's too much. And it's almost like I wish with whether it's politics or religious beliefs or just whatever, I feel like if we can learn to separate ourselves from the hypothesis, we can get a lot further with each other. and not be so judgmental. Do you feel that way at all?
Sure. Yeah, you're right that's a stumbling block to have a. I mean, I would probably call that some kind of fixation where someone develops an attachment, as you say, to a hypothesis. That largely sounds to me like the person is not capable of pursuing the truth, but rather is more interested in some kind of expression rather. So there's to back up a second, we can talk about how there are different human endeavors. There is a human endeavor of expression. Like that's what I do my live looping and rapping. Like that's what that's for. It's for me letting stuff out and feeling as though I am releasing the stuff that I have to offer and release. Cool. That's one human endeavor. You can be expressive. Awesome. Distinct from that, there is truth seeking. Truth seeking requires the total opposite. Like you should be doing zero personal expression in truth seeking. It should be purely just, I'm ready to hear what is true, even if it hurts me. Yeah. And in fact, not to be too self-centered about this, but that's my stage name. So my stage name is Reconsiderate.
Reconsiderate. Oh, look, we came right back.
That's cool. So the word is, so for anybody, because it's not printed on the screen here, for anybody just listening verbally, it's like the word considerate, like, oh, that's so considerate of you, but with re on front, reconsiderate. It's an adjective. So it means like when I present myself as reconsiderate, that means that I'm entering into a space where I'm willing to let go of absolutely anything that I think, anything that I have the opinion of, anything I believe, anything I want, have to forego all of it. You have to go into a space where you're ready to get your ass handed to you. Like I've studied martial arts as well. And I found that being in a dojo humbles you. Like you can't have an attitude in a dojo or you will rapidly be injured. And it's not a joke. And that, like, to go back to education, I would like to see our society move in a direction where all kids do martial arts, like through some age, you know.
I think that's important. I think a lot of that stuff. A friend of one of my former classmates, and her parent was one of our room moms, and she's one of the coolest. Shout out to Alicia Jameson because she's awesome, and her daughter Raven. Her daughter Raven started doing jujitsu. Now, when Raven first came to me, she's very quiet, very soft spoken. Parents were divorced. There's a lot of drama going on in the home situation, but she was like she was kind of finding herself. You know, she had a friend, but I don't think she quite found herself. She took on jujitsu, and her mom shares this on her Instagram, this journey. And Raven started competing, and she learned she didn't like losing. Because there was this, like, she went to a tournament and she lost every match, and her mom would always show this picture of her going, like, or like not raising her hand. The other person's raising her hand. She's like this, and she ended up getting somehow second place in the tournament, but she's still like she's sad. And the third place kid's like, yay, and the first place kid's yay, but she's second place, and she said, but like it's really, there's something to that. Finding the boundary, like finding your physical boundary, or testing yourself and really pushing yourself, it strips away that ego, and it really, and what's great is watching her now grow into the woman she's becoming. Is her focus, her drive, her now I'll tell you what, in a couple more years, I mean, she'll take people to the mat and no problem. And I see that I see her growth in that. And it may not be jujitsu or martial arts for every kid, but you're right. Kids need more of that kind of experience to really, I mean, not necessarily Tyler Durden's Fight Club.
Right.
But in that mindset of, all right, let's test that, let's be Jack's testing of our boundaries or whatever, our physical thing kind of situation. I think that's great. You know, I went to Virginia Military Institute, and that was like prison, but it also what was really funny about me is I went in thinking I was going to be this military hardcore, Army guy, and within the first week I realized how not military I was. And I realized, oh man, I'm a piece of shit. Like, and it was funny, but that was such an important shift in my thinking and realization of who of self-actualization. because I had been leading my life thinking I was going to be this. And then I went to a school where everybody had that mentality. And then I realized how far away from that I was. And I think that's such a health that ultimately is as sucky as it was when I was there. That's such a healthy thing to have happen to you, and to kind of encourage that with kids, I think is important. I also want to just really quickly, just the language arts instructor in me, just looking at Reconsiderate. Re is the prefix that means again, and then considerate, of course, is consider. You think about it, reconsiderate is to consider again, or to be considerate again. It is that step back and think again, kind of step back and consider it again. I think that's freaking awesome, dude. That's awesome.
I'm a big fan of a lot of the stuff you're saying here. It reminded me of a book. Is it okay with you if I go off camera for like 15 seconds to get a book?
Absolutely, right. Because we need a word from our sponsors. All right, we're going to take a quick break from solving all of the world's problems to tell you about a good friend of mine and a service she's offering. Are you tired of feeling like your dream financial future is out of reach? Are you struggling with overwhelming debt, trying to pay off your home early, or simply wanting to give more? Well, my good friend Vanessa Rutter Jackson is here to help. An educator and military veteran, Vanessa is here to guide you through the confusion and make your dream financial future a reality. With her certified financial coaching services, she'll help you create a personalized plan that sets you up to win with money. As an educator and a mother of two, Vanessa understands the challenges of scraping by and stretching paychecks. She's been there, and she knows how to navigate the financial landscape to help you thrive. Don't let financial stress hold you back any longer. Take the first step towards financial freedom today with Rutter Jackson Financial Coaching. Reach out to Vanessa today for a free 45-minute consultation at varutter34@gmail.com, or go to tinyurl.com/RJ-money-coach. That's varutter34@gmail.com or tinyurl.com/RJ-money-coach. Remember, it's never too late to take control of your finances and achieve your dreams. Start your journey to financial freedom with Rutter Jackson Financial Coaching today. All right, now let's get back to solving the world's problems with the most charming host on the interwebs. What you got?
All right, so the book here is, there it is, The Tao of Pooh. You ever heard of this book?
Yeah, vaguely. Yeah, that looks familiar. That's let's explore that a little bit. The Tao of Pooh. Yeah. Or Tao, right? It's Tao.
Tao of Pooh. You know what? If I say Tao, have you heard that term before?
I have. My first interaction with that was the name of the Siamese cat in Incredible Journey, but and I kept calling him Teo, and then I went and watched the movie and it was Tao, and I was like, it's Teo, it's not Tao, and yeah. But for the people not like me that don't know the meaning, please explain the actual meaning of Tao.
Tao is like it means the way. It's a philosophy from Taoism that essentially is that the way to peace and success and prosperity is by going with the flow, essentially. Like, nature's the real deal. You are not more powerful than nature. Be humble, please. Go with what is, appropriate. The reason I bring up this particular book, though, is that it's, first of all, it's awesome. So it's short. What is this, like 150 pages? And you can read it in one sitting. I hate reading, but I can read this book in one sitting. The specific thing that made me think of this was there's a principle in here. Oh, and by the way, Tao of Pooh, so it's like Winnie the Pooh. So it uses the characters of Winnie the Pooh in order to illustrate different Taoist principles. And so, of course, they like, hey, check out Winnie the Pooh. He's just like, oh, what's today? I don't know. Do we have some honey? And that's about it. That's like his whole everything. But it goes through all the different characters, and they're like, well, Piglet kind of gets a little worked up, so that's not the goal.
Yeah, and Eeyore's a little sad.
Yeah. But the one in particular that relates to what we're talking about now is Tigger.
Yes.
So this, I don't know if he calls it the Tigger principle or something, but however he calls it in here, he uses Tigger to illustrate exactly the principle we're talking about. Now, you say anything to Tigger. You could be like, hey, I'm going to go kayaking today. And like, what's the first thing Tigger's going to say? He's going to say, Tigger's the best at kayaking.
Yeah.
He always thinks he's awesome at everything.
Yeah.
Tigger has no sense of his own limitations. None. And so he uses, the author of this book, Benjamin Hoff, he uses Tigger as a way to illustrate. He's like, yo, Tigger is not what you want either. He is just so anti-humble, and look at how it constantly causes him problems.
Yeah.
You don't want that, do you? So that ties in with what we're talking about. Like, know your limitations, be humble, drop the entitlement, do what actually works, be at peace.
Yeah, know yourself. I think about a time in my life when I was 12 years old, and I just moved to Iceland. My dad was Navy. My parents had split up, and it was hard to make new friends. And I finally started hanging out with these guys that were all skaters. They were big time skateboarders. Tony Hawk. They all had the stuff. And I'm so uncoordinated. I couldn't skate to save my life. But we all had like similar, other than the skateboarding, we were like we had the same like humor mentality. We would draw these like hilarious like comics and stuff that would be about the school, and we would tell the same jokes, watch the same movies. We got into Monty Python together. We would, we had all these inside jokes, and we became good friends. But I perpetuated this myth that I could skate, that I was a skateboarder too. I didn't own a skateboard. And the couple times in my life that I tried, I ate it. I landed on my face. So one night they invite me to this lock-in overnight thing at this warehouse where we're all going to just sit there and just skate all night and until the morning, and then just pass out. And I wanted to go, but I was like, oh no, it's going to get revealed that I can't skate. Well, I finally I got to go. And how hard could skateboarding be? You already know where this is going. Sure enough, I eat it. I'm terrible at that, and it's pretty clear, like within minutes, that I don't know what I'm doing. And they I'm just feeling terrible. I think, and they finally, Mike Jones, he was kind of like one of our, he wasn't the ringleader, but he was kind of like, he and I were like good friends, and he pulls me aside and he's like, hey man, it's okay if you can't skate. And it was one of those things and then they all like, yeah, man, come on, we'll do something else. And like, we ended up playing like a hide and seek with these like balled up socks where you peg each other with the socks. I mean, we did all these non-skating things after that, but it was like that realization I didn't need to fake it. They weren't friends with me because I could skate. They were friends with me because our personalities match, and they were friends with me for who I was, versus some lie that I was perpetuating. And then when I realized I didn't need to perpetuate that lie, if I was honest, I'd still hang out. And it was so freeing, but that was such an important moment in my life that I realized why, I always, whenever I'd feel compelled to tell somebody, I like, hey, have you heard of the Socks of Atlantis band? I'm not gonna, a lot of times I'd be compelled to say, yeah, I know them. And I have no idea who they are. I just made up that name. Like, yeah, I love their stuff, and like, I just made that up. It's something about that where I wish people could be more free of being comfortable with who they are, so you don't have to pretend that you're into something that you're not. Does that make sense? And it's kind of like Tigger kind of is in the way matches that, where yeah, I can kayak, and then
I recognize the phenomenon you're describing, while at the same time I don't experience it. So one of the autism things that I would say I'm blessed by is I've never had that problem. I've never had the problem of like not feeling comfortable being myself. I've always been myself turned up to 11, and that's part of why I don't have friends. but I recognize that that's relatively rare. Most people don't have the experience like I do there. Most people do have a, caving to social pressures kind of experience.
I feel like I'm almost the opposite end of you, is that like, I think a lot of times I'm over anxious about that. only in my last 10 years of my life have I realized, and it's not a like, screw everybody, Thanos was right kind of, get that. It's not necessarily that, although there's days where I'm like that. It's more of, I realized that, I don't have to pretend to be somebody I'm not. But it's like, but for so long in my life, I've been worried, like where, you talk about how you haven't had that issue. There's been so many times where I've almost been crippled by overthinking a social situation, that if I just was myself, I'd be fine. But I'm so worried about, are they gonna think this about me, and they're gonna do that. And I wasted a lot of my late teens and early 20s worrying about that kind of stuff. Actually, not early 20s, but like it wasn't until I got to VMI and the military thing that I realized, well, like that wasn't a thing. But do you think a lot of folks worry too much about that instead of being who they are?
I don't know what people worry about, but it does. It behaviorally, it appears to be very prevalent that many people have that same experience.
Yeah.
And there's something in particular you shared in your story about this skating with your friends and such.
Uh-huh.
There's something you said there that ties directly back to mental health conversations, and in particular the state of modern psychology, which I mentioned earlier. I have negative faith in. One of the things that is very, very, how do I say this? It's not broken. It's like, it's just
damaged.
It's missing. Something that's missing from modern psychology is something you just said, which was how you were having this experience where you're, oh, I can't skate. Are they going to reject me? And you're having some reaction to that. And then as soon as your friend came to you, I was like, bro, we don't have to skate. Let's just hang out because we accept you.
Yeah.
That experience, it sounds like, I mean, I wasn't there, but it sounds like that experience brought some relief and confidence to you, and it enabled you to open up and continue connecting with your peers. So
absolutely.
What you've just, so it sounds like that's true. That's good. So I've picked up on an aspect of your story. Good job, me.
Yeah, yay!
But there's an element that reflects of psychology, of human psychological needs, that is missing from modern psychology, which is so-called, in the healthcare field, they're beginning to talk about so-called social determinants of health. They talk about things like a human who is in a very impoverished area where there is, earlier in the conversation, I said, oh, we're not dealing with rampant murder. Well, I mean, some people are, there are actually some areas where that's the daily experience. And for such individuals, if you are in a very impoverished area, if you are in an area where every single day you are literally threatened for your physical health, that matters. It's not like you can just will your way into mental health. I mean, in principle, maybe you could, some people do make it out, but it's like the probabilities are really working against you.
Yeah.
Psychology does not seem to understand this. Psychology thinks like you are a universe unto yourself, and therefore you can just have mental health. It's like wrong. You need to have people around you who are supporting your journey. Otherwise, it's just continuing to accrue more stress. So there's this element of what I'll call a distributed mind, where any given person is not really just the body they're in. They're actually somehow distributed across their, I don't know, local environment.
Yeah.
In a way that's other people also not shoulder that, but they are also vessels for it. My articulation on this one is not as great.
No, I let me reverse and see if I got what you're saying, because this is something I think a lot of times there's always that classic debate of nature versus nurture, environment versus heredity. But it sounds like you're saying it's a bit of column A, a bit of column B. It's a bit of both, and that both of them affect like what you inherit and who you are is one thing, but also your environment impacts your mental health as well. And you're absolutely right. A kid that doesn't know if he's going to get shot in his neighborhood versus a kid in the suburbs who's riding his bike and all that. There's definitely a difference. Do you feel like modern I don't say psychology, but modern mental health doctors, what have you, are they ignoring some of the classic like mental health philosophers like B.F. Skinner, Piaget, like Vygotsky, like a lot of philosophers that were much more like B.F. Skinner, behaviorism. He's the guy. He's the chicken. If every time the chicken hits the button, he gets fed. Eventually, he learns how to do that. Or Pavlov, ring the bell kind of thing. Do you think that there's a reason why we don't want to address those environmental issues that are affecting mental health? And I have another question, but I got to get out of the habit of asking all my guests, with you too, multiple questions and be like, yeah, there's 5 questions, answer all of them right now. So my first question is, why do you feel like, you have that mistrust in psychology, in modern medicine, what have you, but why do you think they're in that state? And have they lost their way from where we're talking about mental health is, or are they going in a direction that eventually will be helpful? Did I articulate myself well on that one?
I can respond to what you said. I don't know if
Good.
you articulated yourself well.
All right.
So why do, let's say, I would say specifically therapists is when I say psychologists, I mean therapists. So maybe I should evolve my language there too. But in any case, how do therapists like miss the social element or the environmental element? I think this is speculation on my part. But I think that part of what the training is, like if you're going to become a therapist, naturally you go to years and years of schooling, and then you have to do whatever, I don't know if they use the word residency, but you have to do a sort of intermediate beginning. Okay, you're going to watch, now you're going to take on a client and all this. So they have these very extensive period of education. And what they are trained with are tools to try to tie like someone's mental state to, I don't know, something that they were, something happened when you were 4 years old, or maybe you are currently lacking the, emotional regulation skills. So let's work on that, or something like that. They're trained to compartmentalize to like little individual nodes of diagnosis. It's this detail. That's what's going wrong with you. What they don't seem to do, in my experience anyway, what they don't seem to do is say like, let me try to understand you as a person, and then consider also that you might be in an environment where you are constantly being stressed every day. Mm-hmm. So maybe we don't have to sit here and talk about emotional regulation if the real issue is you're being abused literally every single day by the person you live with. Somehow that just never becomes part of the conversation. Yeah. A therapist would, in my experience, I'm only saying my experience, but anytime that I would bring up something like that, like, oh, I have this difficult situation I'm dealing with, I have this person who's being abusive toward me, the response is always the same. The response is something like, well, you can't control what other people do, so let's control what you can control, which is true, but it doesn't go far enough because there's something beyond that. There's also, let's give you the social support you need. Let's, like, even something as simple as just basic validation. Hey, sounds like that thing you're struggling with is really happening. Like that would be a nice step forward if we can get some of that.
Well, do you think that's almost like you mentioned, it's a built-in routine? It's almost like a playbook where, and I've seen physical medical doctors do this, where they'll get 100 people coming in for like an issue, the same issue. Like let's say respiratory issues. They'll get 100 people coming in, or actually right now, this actually parallels my dad right now. He's going through this. 100 people come in with back pain, and in their experience, like a lot of times those people, it's just something that'll go away eventually. So what they do is they'll prescribe them something and say, we'll follow up in a month. And then the people that come back, maybe out of those 100, 30 of them come back again in a month and say, Doc, I'm still in pain. And then at that point, they start to do the MRI and start to go. But like, do you think that maybe some of that is like not so much thinning the herd, weeding out folks, but like there's this playbook, instead of actually dealing and listening to the person that's right in front of you, they have this playbook where they're like, all right, I'm going to say these things that I've said to about 100 other people. And then if it doesn't help, then I'll start to look at it. Do you feel it's kind of like that?
I think you could be right about that. I perhaps should incorporate that into my perspective. But there may indeed be an element of just like, in the technical world, we talk about things like having customer support. You have like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 support. And so you might get the tier 1, hey, welcome, thanks for calling our customer support. How can we help you?
Yeah.
I have this problem. Oh, geez, I have no idea. Let's kick you up to tier 2. What I haven't observed in my experience with psychotherapy is the presence of those other tiers. There just seems to be like this, well, we've done everything we can do, which is nothing. And I'm going to give up on you now. Like, that's what I've observed.
It's like you're trying to speak to an operator and it's not, they keep putting you on hold.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. I want to tie this in to not really an elephant in the room, but prescription, the pharmaceutical industry and the desire to medicate problems away. Now, again, it's been my experience with personal friends of mine as well as with students of mine that there are many cases where medication has been tremendous, where it's really helped. I had a student that was diagnosed psychotic, and once he was on medication, he was already prescribed medication, but his mom was taking the medication. It was a whole terrible mess. So he'd come to school a mess. And then when they finally got it where the school nurse was the one administering it, and he was getting what he needed, the medication he needed. By 5th grade, he was making friends. He was so much. He was like, I hate to use the word normal kid because that's so subjective, but he was a much more normal kid. Like when he was in 3rd grade, he was eating pencils and he would just like do crazy things. And when he got to 5th grade, he was like, and you could like, I don't think he realized it as much as we did because we saw how he was. Having said that, and I know other people that where medication helps their mental health, my low negative trust in the pharmaceutical industry, especially right now, that drive to prescribe problems away. Do you feel like there's a bit of that in psychology and therapy where it's almost like you're either financially motivated or professionally motivated to not actually diagnose the true issue and instead try to tie it to something that's going to benefit you as a therapist?
So as a disclaimer, I'm not in that field, so I can't really comment on prevalent.
We are not professionals. We are just two guys talking. That's a little disclaimer at the bottom. Yeah.
So with that disclaimer said, I would say that we could have a more general point of discussion, which is like anytime money is involved, there will always be that kind of corruption.
Yeah.
So without being able to comment on like the percentage of how prevalent that is.
Yeah.
I'm confident saying it's definitely happening. For sure.
It's not zero.
Yeah. that I'm confident saying.
Yeah. I think that, and it's funny too, because if like with the COVID thing too, I'm curious to know like the percentage of people that don't go to the doctor now versus like 4 years ago. My dad has always been afraid of going to the doctor, but like early on in like early 2020, he got in an argument with his doctor about the vaccine. Of course, my dad, I don't understand. My dad's in his late 70s, Scottish descent, just, definition of lovable but cranky old man. Lovable, but like imagine Sean Connery, like kind of going, but like, who do you think you are? Oh, you think doc, you think you know everything. Well, let me tell you about what I read on some obscure website. That kind of thing. And so, and he actually is kind of fun to get spun up sometimes, but it's like, but his mistrust and like, he won't go to the doctor unless he's like, his arm is falling off now, because he's afraid that when he's like, what's the point? You go in there and they're just going to string you along.
Yeah.
And I wonder, with COVID and everything, there seems to be a huge mistrust now in a lot of and it's not to get political or vaccine, not vax, whatever that stuff, but more so just kind of like a mistrust in that, whereas people are reluctant to seek the help that they probably actually need and would get in certain situations. Of course, not with the therapist that you've run into, where it's been kind of, hold please, press numero dos for Espanol. Yeah, you're it's kind of like that. But I almost feel like we need to kind of, I don't know, we need to kind of start building some trust back, and that, I think that starts with focusing, being good listeners to your patients and getting back to that. And what's the quote? I always mess this one up, and I can't remember if it's Mark Twain or not. It's the one about, you can't convince somebody to understand your point of view if their salary depends on not understanding it. And I'll go look it up and post at it here and figure it out. But it really seems like that can be a problem in the medical field and in therapy.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. It's like, I think you might be this, but I'll get a nice bonus or a promotion if I diagnose you as this, and that kind of thing.
There's another element of psychology that we could talk about here, which is that most of the time, most people are not rational. Even though they think they are, most people are actually operating according to like very subconscious motivating factors, whether that's anything from, I don't know, getting revenge against someone who wronged you 20 years ago, and now it has manifested in this way, whatever that might be. But there's also the element of like what's happening in your environment is immediately infecting you, like money. So it would be a very foolish perspective to say something like, yeah, they could get a lot of money, but they're a moral person. That person isn't going to make that kind of corrupted decision. No, it's actually, morality doesn't come into the picture at all. It's pure psychology. If there's money on the table and all you have to do is quickly prescribe a pill that this person doesn't need, and now you get all this money, that's a low breaking point. And many people are going to reach that. And it's purely because the money's there. So it's, the corruption is not, it's not absolute and omnipresent, but the temptation of it will make some people cave to the temptation.
I like the word you use, a low breaking point too, because like when you think of somebody that's corrupt, you think of, I always have this image of this like dark kind of, gaunt person just counting their money going, oh, look at all this power. But like in reality, like you said, there's those low, it's kind of like if you're a little kid and mom and dad aren't home and the cookies are in a cookie jar, but they're up on the cabinet and they're far away. Yeah, there's going to be an effort. You might slip and fall. You might break something. So there's some risk. But if the cookie's on the counter, it's like, it's like, oh, I'm going to eat it. And it's like, you're right about that. It's almost unfair to just completely paint it with a broad brush called corrupt.
Right.
And I wonder, it makes me wonder about our politicians, our government, a lot of these industries where I think a lot of folks get into those industries with positive intentions, perhaps for the most part. And then it's that cookie here, those low breaking points that add up. And before you know it, you're compromised. And I wonder if some of the solutions are, again, disclaimer, whatever, we're not medical professionals, what have you. But I feel like I see it in the education industry. I see education industry. Yeah. Slip of the tongue, but yeah, it actually is. I see it in a lot of things where when the motivation is financial or esteem oriented, like for example, school principals are not rated upon student growth, or most schools they're rated on how many students pass a certain standard, and they're also rated on how many referrals were written for behavior. Well, like you said, if you look through the lens that you were talking about everybody should make moral decisions and blah blah blah, no one's going to be tempted, you'd say, okay, that makes sense. But when you really break it down, it's like, okay, you're from the behavior standpoint, what happens is less referrals get written. The behavior is still there. In fact, the behavior gets worse because kids realize I can act up and I'm not going to get a referral. There's not going to be any penalty. But when they're looking at the principal's record, oh, your referrals went down. Great job managing behavior. The same thing with the standard is you get, oh, great job getting all these kids above standard. Well, a lot of things. Yeah, you probably worked really hard with these kids to get them to a standard. Is it legit? I don't know. Did they really learn anything, or were they just like learning how to take a test? I don't know. But you're also ignoring these kids up here that naturally would pass that standard, that may or may not get the focus they need because you're focused on getting these kids to pass. Are these kids learning anything at all? Because they're gonna pass. Do they get that attention? And I don't need to get off a tangent on that, but it's like I wonder if we relook at where the motivations are with our leadership and with our different industries, and look at more of like how it services. And again, this, I don't mean to come across Pollyanna here, but if we were much more, if we use human behavior in a way that does the better, more good rather than personal interest, I almost feel like that would help us. That would help perpetuate a better outcome. And I don't even know if I've fully thought this whole thought process out, but because you're absolutely right. It's like we're lying to ourselves. We're not dealing with reality if we think everyone's going to naturally, intrinsically be moral.
Yep.
And it's not. But also conversely, you're not an evil person if you eat that cookie.
Yep.
It's a low breaking point. I'm guilty of it myself. My wife not screams at me, but she shakes her head when I eat the last ho-ho or something, and it's like, and I knew I shouldn't. And I sat there for hours knowing I shouldn't do it. But then I'm in the kitchen and there it is. Yeah. Oh, and it's that doesn't mean I'm sitting there at night going, "Ooh, I'm going to eat that ho-ho tomorrow." So I get what you're saying, dude. This is great stuff here, man. I don't know. Is it feasible to shift our society into a direction where we can be real with each other about human nature and not Pollyanna about everyone being moral, but also restructure society so that we understand human behavior, but we reward those that make, and not punish those that don't, but reward those that make those things that drive us forward. And again, I'm talking and I'm getting into some deep weeds here that I'm not even sure where I'm going with it.
Yeah.
But did anything I just say make any sense or bring any bells for you?
Sure. Yeah. It sounds like you're alluding to something vaguely in this direction. The effect of like our modern American cultural narrative lacks the wisdom of incentive. Like it just kind of pretends as though incentives are not a thing.
Yeah.
And if we were to move in a direction where we had a realistic, like the idea of incentives were thoroughly woven into all levels of everything, then yeah, things would be much more functional, and we would have a much more, how should I say, a much more realistic way to manage human behavior and human psychology in a way that actually lands, rather than just like, I wish people would just act moral. It's like you're always going to have the problems we have today if you have that approach.
I gotta preface something. I gotta be careful here because I just realized, like, where the person making the decision of what's moral could be that person. I am not advocating for a social credit score or anything like that. I just started thinking like, oh no, this could also go this way if we're not careful. I am not advocating for that or anything like that. So yeah, I just want to make sure that little asterisk gets put in that. But yeah, go ahead. Do you see that? What are your thoughts on that though?
I mean, my thoughts are that will inevitably happen because that is reality. Mm-hmm. So to the degree that humans, as I said earlier, are always moving in the direction of continuing to asymptotically approach reality, we will inevitably create a society in which realistic incentives are taken into consideration. It's inevitable. The question is just when. I don't know. Hopefully while I'm still alive.
Yeah, knock on wood. Well, Anthony, this has been tremendous. We're almost pushing 2 hours. I feel like we could do another 2 hours. I'd love to have you back, maybe like further on in the summer, to come back and continue to explore. I honestly, real talk, dude. I feel like I've kind of expanded my mind a little bit. I was coming into this discussion thinking just to learn a little more about autism, but I feel like you and I have really had some really deep discussions, and I think they're discussions that could continue. So yeah, this has been great, man. I hope you've had a good time. Is there any final words of wisdom, thoughts, or maybe something specific to autism or whatever? Any advice that you want to give to our listeners before we call it a day?
There is one point about autism that I didn't mention, but I want to. I don't have advice for anyone, certainly not beyond anything I've said over the past 2 hours. Mm-hmm. But the singular point that I never said today, but I meant to, is that autism is not a mental health issue. It's a social processing disability. So it shouldn't be categorized as mental health. And that's part of me being the activist, trying to get people to understand. So that's my only closing point when it comes to specifically autism. It's not mental health at all. It's actually not even related. We can say that somebody who is autistic, because they have additional challenges, are more likely to need mental health support.
Yeah.
But that's distinct from saying that autism is a mental health issue. It's a social processing disability, and that's the full extent of it.
Awesome. Well, Anthony, aka Reconsiderate, this has been awesome. Check out reconsiderate.com. I'll have all the socials and everything at the bump at the end here. Well, for Anthony, this has been awesome. This has been another very mind-opening Mental Health Mondays. I hope you enjoyed the discussions and the journey. The journey continues. Keep on keeping on. Yeah, come say hi to us on the Fetasy Locals. That's PHETS ETASY. I am not dyslexic, but I sometimes talk that way. Anyways, come hang out with us. Check out reconsiderate.com and like, share, subscribe, comment below any of the thoughts that you had, any of the stuff that we were talking about. If you have your own thoughts, let us know, and make sure you subscribe and share. Have a great week and enjoy yourself. Be happy. Catch new episodes of Mental Health Mondays every Monday morning at 7 a.m. Start your week off with a smile and some inspiration.